You won't believe what happened next. A drummer who hated the spotlight became the quiet center of a storm, and when he passed, the band he'd anchored for nearly 60 years didn't show up to his funeral. Sounds cold, right? Not so fast. The real story is complicated, human, and honestly, kind of beautiful. So let's rewind, breathe, and look at why Charlie Watts meant so much, why his send-off looked the way it did, and how the band kept moving without the man whose groove made their songs walk tall. Losing a friend never gets easier. As you get older, it's not just colleagues who slip away, it's people you've shared cramped vans with, long nights with, inside jokes and dumb arguments, and years that add up to a life. For the Rolling Stones, Charlie Watts wasn't just a drummer. He was the calm on a stage that roared, the eye of their hurricane. When he died in 2021, fans assumed the others, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Ronnie Wood, would be there in person, front row, saying goodbye. When they weren't, the rumor mill started spinning. But if you know the man and the moment, the choice makes a quiet kind of sense. Before we get to that part, let's talk about the person behind the kit. For decades, Charlie Watts was the anti-rock star. While headlines chased Mick's swagger and Keith's chaos, Charlie kept his head down and the backbeat steady. But even the most composed people hit turbulence. In the mid-1980s, life pressed in. He wasn't chasing thrills or trying to top anyone's bad boy story. He was wrestling with family stress, middle age, and the weight that comes with both. Drinks got stronger, lines got longer. The man who'd been the band's conscience drifted, and he nearly lost the one person who'd been there before the bright lights ever found him, his wife, Shirley. That wake-up call changed him. By the second half of the 80s, he recalibrated. He stepped back from the spiral, quit smoking, and put his sense of order back where it belonged, in his life and in his playing. People talk about discipline like it's dull. For Charlie, discipline was daring. It was choosing steadiness in a world that rewards noise. Then came 2004. Out of nowhere, the kind of alarm bell that stops your breath. Cancer. Charlie faced it with the same understatement he used for everything. He went through hard treatment, didn't turn it into a tragic press tour, and, when he was ready, rejoined the guys to make a new record. The patience they showed him mattered. They didn't rush him back to work. They waited. And when he walked into the studio again, the music fell into place like muscle memory. A massive tour followed. Years on the road, night after night, the kind of grind only a handful of people on the planet truly understand. Someone once asked him how he kept pushing. He joked that every time they took a break, he got sick. So he figured he'd better keep playing. Fast forward to 2021. Yadiso, band announces that Charlie will sit out the U.S. dates while he recovers from a medical procedure. That was rare for him. This is a guy who never missed shows. Commitment was part of his DNA. To hold his spot, they brought in Steve Jordan, a close friend of Keith's and a drummer with the kind of muscle and taste you need to step into that chair without trying to be the man who left it. If you've ever watched a band grieve in real time, you know it looks like honoring what came before while keeping the lights on for the thousands who still show up. On August 24th, 2021, Charlie Watts died in London at 80, surrounded by family. The music world shook, then got very, very quiet. Mick Jagger posted a photo that radiated joy, because that's what he wanted people to remember. Keith Richards said everything by saying almost nothing, a photo of a drum kit with a closed sign hanging on it. Ronnie Wood called him a brother, old mate and former bandmate Bill Wyman sent love. Across rock's family tree, Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, Elton John, Brian Wilson, Pete Townshend, Nick Mason, Roger Daltrey, U2, Bryan Adams, Liam Gallagher, Brian May, Roger Taylor, Kenny Jones, Chad Smith, Questlove, Peter Criss, Max Weinberg. You could feel the respect. Not just great drummer respect, but good man respect. Then the band did something startling in its simplicity. They turned their entire website into a single black and white image of Charlie. No scrolling, no press releases, just his face. In a world that never shuts up, silence can be the loudest thing of all. 2 days after he passed, musicians on the road dedicated songs to him. A few days after that, the band released a short film montage, home footage, candid shots, the drummer smiling from behind his kit while a tune from the 70s played underneath. It didn't ask for your tears, it just invited them if they came. That's very Charlie. Here's where the whispers start. The funeral. It was small. It was private. It was held away from paparazzi lenses in a place he loved, Devon, far from the endless buzz. And the band. They weren't there. Cue the headlines, cue the hot takes. But look at the calendar, the world, and the person they were honoring, and you'll see why staying away might have been the most loyal thing they could do. In late August 2021, the Stones were in Boston, deep in full-dress rehearsals for a giant U.S. tour that had already been delayed thanks to the pandemic. This wasn't some pub run-through. It was a traveling city. Riggers, drivers, stage designers, lighting teams, sound crews, security, caterers. Hundreds of people whose jobs were on the line. Stopping a machine like that isn't like canceling a dinner reservation. It ripples outward, lost paychecks, blown timelines, venues stuck with empty nights. After a year and a half of postponed shows, those workers needed the tour to happen as much as the fans did. Travel rules at the time made everything even trickier. Flying into the UK meant quarantine. Coming back meant more restrictions. One trip across the Atlantic to attend a small family-only service would have blown up weeks of planning and risked blowing up the tour entirely. And remember, this was the summer when the Delta variant was rolling through. The band had built a protective bubble around their traveling crew to keep the show viable. If one key person tested positive, whole legs of the tour could fall like dominoes. That's not drama. That was the reality of live music in that moment. Now layer on the most important factor, Charlie Watts himself. He hated fuss. He liked privacy. He loved his family more than he loved the noise, and he was suspicious of spectacle for spectacle's sake. A packed media line outside a funeral. Flashbulbs popping while people cry. That was the opposite of everything he valued. Those who worked closest with him will tell you, he would not have wanted cameras craning over hedges, helicopters circling, or a red carpet vibe for grief. The band knew that. Sometimes the loudest tribute is leaving room for the people who mattered most to the person you lost. So they honored him the way he would have wanted, through the work, through the music, through subtle touches that cut deep if you were paying attention. Every night of the tour before a single riff hit the air, the screens filled with Charlie, looped footage of his hands, his smile, that slight lean he had as he held the time. The famous lips and tongue logo shifted to monochrome, a small gesture that said what needed saying without a speech. Mick Jagger would talk to the crowd about Charlie, not to wring tears from anyone, but to acknowledge the person missing from the lineup everyone knew by heart. It wasn't grandstanding. It was gratitude. If you only met Charlie Watts as a rock legend, you missed half the picture. The other half starts in London's jazz clubs, where a young drummer with crisp suits and sharper ears soaked up swing and R&B. He met Brian Jones, Ian, Stu Stewart, Mick Jagger, and Keith Richards in that small world of sweaty rooms and postage stamp stages. At first he said no to their band. Sensible man. He had steady work, real money, and no guarantee these blues-mad kids would be anything but another flash. But chemistry nags at you. In January 1963 he joined, and everything locked into place. A few weeks later, he played his first show with them at a local jazz club, not knowing he was stepping into history. What made his style so special? Economy. Space. He didn't crowd the music, he framed it. Listen closely and you'll hear it. The way he tugs back on the beat just enough to make the groove feel dangerous, the way he lifts choruses without bashing, the way the hi-hat conversation never stops. Mick nicknamed him the Wembley Whammer, and the joke landed because it was half wrong. Charlie wasn't a thumper, he was a dancer. You can copy. Phil's you can't fake feel. And he wasn't just behind the drums, he was a visual thinker with a pencil in his hand and ideas in his back pocket. He sketched artwork, he tinkered with layouts, he pushed for theatrical stage designs that turned venues into living sets. Lotus-shaped risers, steel and concrete fantasies, catwalks, slicing through crowds. One of the band's wildest press announcements, rolling down a Manhattan Avenue on a flatbed truck blasting a song while office workers leaned out of windows, sprang from that playful mind that loved old jazz traditions and knew mischief in equal measure. People who toured with the band will tell you Charlie's professionalism was legendary. Show at 8, he was ready at 7, he didn't miss, he didn't melt down, he didn't make his troubles anybody else's problem. His final show with the band in late August 2019 closed out a run that had defied time, gravity, and common sense. Then the world shut down. When it opened, he was gone. Even after his death, his playing kept turning up. Finished tracks held in the vaults, songs that wore his fingerprints. A snare snap here, a push on the crash there, that patient ride cymbal telling the whole band to breathe. Hearing him posthumously is bittersweet. The music is alive. The man is not. But isn't that the point of records? To trap time in amber and let us visit? Now, the home life. If the stage was thunder, home was a whisper. In October 1964, Charlie Watts married Shirley Ann Shepard, the woman who knew him before the suits got shinier and the hotels got bigger. They had a daughter, Serafina, and later a granddaughter, Charlotte. They lived in the countryside, in a place where the loudest noise was hooves. Yes, hooves. Charlie loved Arabian horses. He didn't dabble. He built a respected stud farm and learned the craft like he learned everything else, by listening, studying, and showing up. Picture it, the most famous drummer in rock-scraping mud-off boots. That's not image management. That's who he was. He collected beautiful things in a gentle way, first editions, pieces of history, items that told stories. He adored cricket. He could talk about it for hours with the same zeal fans reserved for guitar solos. He had a stake in the band's business, too. For all of his modesty, he understood that art and commerce dance together in the modern world, and he handled his side of the deal with care. The car thing. Classic Charlie. He loved looking at them, loved the lines in the build, but never learned to drive. He treated them the way other people treat sculptures. Admire, don't touch. Again, the man did not do cliches. When Shirley passed in 2022, fans felt the sadness of a story closing in 2 chapters. Nearly 6 decades of marriage in an industry that chews love up and spits it out. That tells you more about Charlie than any drum solo ever could. All of this brings us back to the question that started the I.O. gossip. How does a band go on when the person who anchored them is gone? And why weren't they at the funeral? The first answer is both practical and poetic. They go on by playing. It's the only language that ever mattered between them and the audience. They carry the groove forward because that's what Charlie did for them night after night. The second answer is respect. They stepped back and let family have space. They protected a tour that supported hundreds of workers. They refused to turn grief into a media moment. If you're still mad at them for that, fair enough. Grief is personal. But if you're undecided, consider this. Sometimes loyalty looks like showing up. Sometimes loyalty looks like staying away. There's a moment audiences witnessed on that first tour without Charlie. The lights go down, the screen glows with his face. People cheer and cry at the same time. Then the band walks out. Mick nods. Keith glances over his shoulder to a drum seat now occupied by Steve Jordan, not as a replacement, but as a caretaker of a tradition. They count in. The first chord rings, and for a split second, it's as if Charlie is still there, right hand riding the hi-hat, left foot tapping, time only he can hear, head turned slightly to the side as if to say, "Ho, all right, lads, let's go." Maybe that's the part the hot takes miss, how a person can vanish from a stage and still be everywhere in the sound. Close your eyes during those shows and you could almost hear the spaces he left. Those little pockets around the snare, the breath between kick and hat that made every riff feel a touch more dangerous. That's the trick of great players. You feel them most in their restraint. And when you step back from the mythology, you see a simple thread running through his story. Charlie Watts built a life that honored craft over chaos, privacy over performance, family over fame. He made art quietly and let the loud bits belong to others. He fought his demons, walked away from them, and kept his promises. In a business full of noise, he chose taste. So, why didn't the band attend the funeral? Because it was small, because the world was on fire, because the machine they'd spent months restarting would have ground to a halt, and because the man they were saying goodbye to would have hated a scrum of cameras outside a church door. They mourned the way they knew how. By putting his image on the screens, by turning a scarlet logo black and white, by talking to crowded stadiums as if they were in a small room, and by letting the groove keep walking. If you think about it, that's one of the most Charlie-like tributes they could have offered. What now? The legacy. You can hear it in the tracks that never age. You can see it in younger drummers who learned the power of less. You can feel it in the way a stadium falls into time when the right drummer plays the right part. And you can sense it any time a band decides to underplay the moment and let the song breathe. That's Charlie. Not shouting, not waving, just there, like a heartbeat you don't notice until it stops. If you've made it this far, here's a little nudge to carry with you the next time one of their songs comes on. Don't just sing the chorus, lock in with the drums. Notice the way the hi-hat leans, the way the snare waits a hair before it speaks, the way the bass drum never bullies the room. That's the sound of a gentleman making rowdy music elegant. That's Charlie Watts. And if you're wondering how the story ends, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it loops forever like a record, needle down, groove steady, time suspended. Somewhere out in Devon, the wind moves through a field and the world is quiet enough to hear a rhythm that isn't trying to impress anyone. That feels right. Before we wrap, I want to hear from you. What's the one performance where you feel Charlie most? Is it that sly backbeat on a bluesy number, the crisp snap on a pop hit, or the way he kept it simple when everyone else tried to go big? Drop your pick in the comments and tell me why. If this story hit you in the feels or taught you something new, do the usual. Hit like, share it with someone who loves great drummers, and subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive. Thanks for hanging out, and here's to Charlie Watts' steady hands, steady heart, forever in time.